Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Where Are We? We are in Exploring the Lord of the Rings, and this is session number 273. Today we get to the rather abrupt ending of the council near the knees of Carathras. So, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. The fell voices on the air. That's of course a quote from Boromir's description of what he heard up in Carathras when the wind was howling about them. And there are yet more fell voices on the air. Let them call it the wind who will. As Aragorn is just about to point out. We paused, of course, last time to have a really fun discussion of Aragorn's presentiment, his moment of foretelling, that was a really fun discussion. Even though we ended up looking ahead quite a bit while talking about it. Obviously, the subsequent events that came up. It's hard to think about a prediction like that without thinking about the moment in which that prediction is going to be, is going to be borne out. So I don't apologize for that. Obviously, we'll be coming back and thinking about this more when we get there and see it from that perspective. Anyway, yeah, I thought that was I thought that was a really fun discussion. So this week we move forward. First, a couple quick announcements. One, we are beginning to get closer to our first fall moot for this year. Our first fall moot is Cascade Moot, going to the Pacific Northwest for the first time. So I will be in Portland, Oregon on the 24th of September, the 23rd. Anyway, that weekend, whichever the day it is, the Saturday, we will be in Portland, Oregon for Cascade Moot. I hope that you guys will be able to join us. Go to blackberry.signumuniversity.org as always, and you can find the registration there. Of course, you can join us remotely as well as in person. Again, as always, for all of our moots. This is going to be a really fun time. We're going to be doing some particular. One of the things that the organizers of Cascade Moot wanted to do was do a lot of celebration of Ursula Le Guin. So we're going to be talking about a lot of Le Guin as well as inevitably Tolkien as well during that moot. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So looking forward to getting to meet a bunch of folks for the first time at Cascade Moot. But I wanted to remind you guys that it is coming up. So definitely. Be making plans for that, and then we move into, from there, the busy fall moot season to come. So that's one immediate thing that's coming up. Something that's happening even sooner than that, actually, is a major milestone. So I was talking last week about last Thursday evening, I did my summer update where I was talking about the really exciting things that are happening at Signum now. The really exciting things are our coming into the home stretch of our process of applying for accreditation. We have been in the process of working towards accreditation for many, many years now. We have our final evaluation for accreditation. We have the last stage. Now, this is not the finish line in the sense of, coming to the end and whipping out the party hats. This is it's more like when you study for an entire course of studies and then have your big major final exam at the end. So it's the approach of the final exam is what's happening. But that's still really exciting. Like this is the culminating moment. And yes, as Matt says, there is no finish line. That is certainly true. But anyway, so it certainly is an exciting moment. This is something we've been working towards. We've been engaged in the active process for over 5 years now. We have been, and we were preparing for that for, 5 to 7 years before that. So it is a very, very exciting time, but we do need help. We need to raise some funds in order to help us pay for the fees that the end stretch brings. And our goal is to raise $25,000 to help support our credentialing costs here at the end. So if you go to the link Druid's Fire, just put it up there. You can find it here on the Signum University webpage. Go to signumuniversity.org. Go to the Support Us tab and the Summer 23 Appeal page here. I made a little video. You can watch my video where I'm talking about it. Share the page, make a donation if you can. Really appreciate everybody's generosity. We did this once before. Some of you may remember in 2018 when we began this process. That was when we were applying for approval from the Higher Education Commission in the state of New Hampshire here. We had a wonderfully generous response to our need to cover the extraordinary fees. Certainly extraordinary in the sense of our normal budget. So anyway, that's we've been really appreciating people's generosity again. We've already raised about $7,000 in the first few days. So we're well on our way towards our $25,000 goal, but we still have some more need there. So just wanted to encourage people, if you can, to reach out and support us there. One thing I will say, there's a donation form on this page. It's not... it's a frustrating thing to me. Don't even get me started. It's if you're not in the country, it's going to give you a hard time filling out that form. In that case, just go to the regular donate form, and that one should be okay for international donations. Just send us an email at donate@signumu.org, and we'll know to, count your donation towards our support there. So there we are. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention, to thank everybody for your support, everybody who's already given to help support that, everybody who's been sort of, part of our community that's been supporting this. You guys have really been, I was just having a conversation about this with the folks at the Higher Education Commission in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, and they're always very impressed with Signum. Signum's very unusual, and the thing that they have always had a hard time understanding is how we do it, how we get the support that we get, how we have survived, like how we started up and how we survived, basically. And the answer has always been because of the awesome community of people that we have. Yes, nerd power, Mudmore. That is exactly how Signum has been able to accomplish everything that we've done. So, anyhow, thank you for your support there. Really appreciate it. Let's let's jump into the text and move forward here. Okay, so suddenly Aragorn leapt to his feet. "How the wind howls!" he cried. "It is howling with wolf voices. The wargs have come west of the mountains." "Need we wait until morning, then?" said Gandalf. "It is as I said. The hunt is up. Even if we live to see the dawn, who now will wish to journey south by night with the wild wolves on his trail?" "How far is Moria?" asked Boromir. "There was a door southwest of Carathras, some 15 miles as the crow flies, and maybe 20 as the wolf runs," answered Gandalf grimly. "Then let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow if we can," said Boromir. "The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears." "True," said Aragorn, loosening his sword in its sheath. "But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls." This is, of course, reminds you of that moment when Gimli and Elrond started to get into like the aphorism competition, right? So the dueling rhyming aphorisms that Aragorn and Boromir exchange here is cool. So we've got a lot to talk about here about Boromir and what's going on with Boromir. But first, there are several things to notice here. First, they are being chased by wolves. The party is being chased by wolves under the shadow of the mountains, with the fear that orcs may be soon behind them and that they might be trapped. Now, we have a paradigm for this. This is familiar to us, should be familiar to us, right? So, I mean, one of the first things that we want to make sure we don't lose sight of, because it's actually, given the differences in the whole kind of atmosphere and tone of the two scenes, I find it surprisingly easy to overlook. But yes, this is the out of the frying pan into the fire situation, right? We have an almost, what seems almost like a deliberate callback to that moment in The Hobbit. Now, the question is, what's the effect of that? Why? I always want to frame it as a why question. Why is not really the right question, because to say, like, why does Tolkien set up that parallel implies that we're trying to get into his head and figure out what he was thinking at the time, and we can't do that. So I always want to say why. I've done this for many, many years. I always want to frame that as a why question, but why isn't really what I mean. What I mean is, what conclusions can we draw from that? What do we see from this parallel, from this parallel that has been established? What is the function of this parallel? First of all, one thing that we notice is that, of course, it's not an exact parallel. The wargs have come west of the mountains. Aragorn announces it like that itself is a big deal. Remember, we're going to get a similar issue if we remember ahead, in just a few chapters, right? The questions of whether the orcs are on the west bank of the river or only the east bank of the river is going to be a matter of discussion before too long. That idea of a sort of a threshold to be crossed, I didn't think things were as bad as that, kind of thing. However, when I think about the parallel, sit back for a second and let that parallel kind of do its work. Once you observe the similarity between this situation, there they are in the woods at night, near the mountains, trying to run away on foot from a warg pack that is pursuing them, howlingly pursuing them in the night. Once we see that parallel, what does it lead us to expect? Where does that take us, right? Yeah, JJ, it is interesting. You're right that it's a kind of reversal. Right? Instead of running away from a goblin stronghold, they're running toward one. Yeah, exactly. Yes, if we sort of think it through, once we see the parallel, we might anticipate something along the line of 15 birds and 5 fir trees, as Bob says. And Sphinx, I agree with you. The primary thing that it makes me remember, this is one of the moments. Of course, you could even say, I guess theoretically, of course, Gandalf's rescuing them from the trolls was the very first eucatastrophe, right, in this world, in The Hobbit. But the arrival of the eagles, right, the eagles, they're a big deal, right? The eagles are a big deal. The eucatastrophic arrival of the eagles at the last moment as everything seemed lost. That is what that moment led to, right? Their sudden escape, and their sudden escape, which then set them down on the right path again, right? Now, I don't know, right? This doesn't mean, therefore we know how this incident should end, right? Again, if we imagine ourselves as first-time readers here coming across this doesn't mean that we should be watching for eagles to come. Right. And of course, knowing what we know of the story, we know it's not going to duplicate that. Exactly. However, it is for me impossible not to think, not to associate this plight that they are in with the eucatastrophe with which it ended in The Hobbit, right? When last we were in this kind of position, it ended with a eucatastrophe. And one of the first times where it seemed clearest that they were being helped along the way, right? That their path was being aided by chance, right? Of course, when we look backwards from there, we can see it's already been happening. We will get to the point, and of course the narrator of The Hobbit comes to this point at the beginning of chapter 10, as Bilbo is rafting down the river, and Gandalf and Bilbo themselves come explicitly to this point in conversation at the end of the final chapter. But we can begin to see the pointers that Providence is at work, that luck, as Bilbo keeps calling it and keeps thinking of it, has in fact been shaping their journey all along. And that even the things that seemed particularly unlucky, the things that seemed like everything was going against them, right? That every step along their journey, things kept going wrong. And of course, the larger pattern in The Hobbit was that when you look at all of those things, the derailing of the pass over the mountains by being captured by the goblins, the derailing of fleeing from there by being cornered by the wargs and then flown off by eagles, the going through the one path through Mirkwood and ending up leaving the path and getting captured by spiders and then by wood elves, right? All of those things lead up to, as the narrator points out in chapter 10, to in fact all of those particularly unfortunate occurrences which happen time and time again at every stage of their journey end up leading them to the one uniquely safe path from Bag End to the Lonely Mountain, and the path which they certainly would never have taken had they not been forced off their planned path, which they thought was the best, smartest, and most practical path, but which, of course, in the end would not actually have worked out and would have only led them to destruction instead. Curious Chance is asking if I can put it no plainer. Yeah, well, that's exactly it. No, I can put it no plainer than to say they were meant to get to the Lonely Mountain, and not just by Gandalf. So that moment, the out of the frying pan into the fire moment, is specifically, of course, the catastrophic culmination of that with the eagles. It's an important moment in kind of understanding the thematic shape of that story. And if you remember, and those of you who have read my Hobbit book may remember that I talked about this. This was one of those things. There were a whole bunch of things that I'd kind of discovered for the first time while writing that Hobbit book. It's the way this usually works, and it's what makes it so much fun. But one of the things was the wind song, which I had never understood at all. In the wind song that the dwarves sing in Beorn's house, right? Like, what the heck are they talking about, and why did they sing that song there? Because it's super long, too. Anyway, that song sort of points to this. It's like the dwarves themselves are kind of processing also what has just happened and the kind of destiny that seems to be sweeping them along towards the Misty Mountains, though they themselves don't really seem to kind of follow it up or really get it. But anyway, okay. I see several of you getting way ahead of things. We'll get to talking about the wolves. We can't get there from here, can we? Right? Do we have any data about the wolves? No. All we're told here is that it's howling with wolf voices. Aragorn's assertion that the wargs have come west of the mountains, okay, which is the name with the word that's used in The Hobbit for the wolves that corner them up the trees, right? So we're supposed to be specifically remembering that. and then the association of the wolves with orcs, which of course we don't need Aragorn to tell us about because we already know this from The Hobbit, right? That is literally all we can say right now. So be patient. Be patient. Let's not be hasty. Exactly as several of you, Scott and Valori, were both saying. We'll get there. There will be much to talk about, and I can't wait to talk about the nature of these wolves that are coming after them. But that is not a tonight question, so let's save that. What does Sherlock Holmes say? It's always fatal to speculate in the absence of data, and that is just what we would be doing here. Okay. Yeah. Right. Guild Olivan says, we can ascertain that wolves have voices, wolves run, wolves can be heard, and wargs howl. The association with orcs, that's about the only other thing I can think of. Yeah. Okay. No, Bob, it still won't get to be a tonight question. There is a second slide, but it won't do that. Okay. Anyway, and that we don't like them. Yes. And that, that there is a certain amount of trepidation concerning the wolves is definitely another thing that, that we hear. Okay. So, true. Aragorn doesn't like them. We may or may not be earning at our discretion, of course. So having first kind of pointed, and we'll come back, especially if we get to a second slide, we'll come back to the Hobbit parallel business. Blancs Mon, that is well remembered. The Shire history and wolves thing, right? Yes, that is worth remembering, though I think the narrator's reminder of it is yet to come, right? We'll get back there. Hang on a second. Blancs Mon, let me think. I know that they're in the Tale of Years. It's mentioned in the passage about the snow. Okay, Hrothgar, thanks. That's what I was trying to make sure I wasn't misplacing that passage in my mind. Okay. Right. Because in the passage about the snow, it says the only Bilbo was old enough to remember that, and it mentioned the wolves then. Okay. Yep. Okay. Great. Yes. Great. And in the Shire, it's only wolves. That is an interesting question. And I forget who brought this up a little while ago. Yes, Vardendale was pointing out that it's Aragorn who calls them wargs. Everyone else says wolves. Boromir says wolf. Gandalf says wolf twice. Aragorn says wolf too. It's howling with wolf voices. And then he says the wargs have come west of the mountains. Kurtzimus asks, what is a warg? What I think it is fair, especially in this context, to recall what is said in The Hobbit. We have to be a little careful because not everything in The Hobbit necessarily kind of carries over to The Lord of the Rings. Stone giants, e.g. But nevertheless, and of course we're in proximity to that exception, so it's relevant, but still, the name, neither Aragorn nor the narrator needs to explain what that means, right? I mean, first of all, the juxtaposition, it's howling with wolf voices, the wargs have come west of the mountains, tells us, right, that wargs are wolves, right? The fact that he says that, and he says that with a capital letter, suggests that it's the name of them, like this is a specific sort of kind of wolf. What we're told in The Hobbit is, it's never really explained. We do know that they are intelligent. They have their own language, which Gandalf understands. Gandalf speaks warg. Well, at least he understands warg. It's not, we never see Gandalf speaking warg, so let me not go so far as that. We know that they are in league with the goblins, and they are whenever they are talked about there, they are treated as allies of the goblins. They join with the goblins in wicked deeds, we're told, in The Hobbit. So they're treated not as beasts, like not as just as steeds or as like domesticated animals or slaves or something like that. They're treated as allies. And indeed, of course, we can see that they're treated not only as allies, but, well, no, we can see them being treated as allies again explicitly in the Battle of Five Armies, right? That is, the wolves seem to be counted. Now, trying to figure out what are the five armies exactly that are participating in the Battle of Five Armies is a little bit complicated. But the simplest way to describe that is elves, humans, and dwarves on the one side and wargs and goblins on the other side. So that is probably how in the final text we're supposed to be understood. The eagles, I don't think, count. They're not a whole army. And it's complicated because the counting changed. The name of the battle never changed, but the counting changed at various points in the manuscript development. Bjorn led an army of bears in the original draft. And so Bjorn's bear army was totally one of the five armies at first. So it's not really, as I say, in the final, I don't think Bjorn technically counts as an army of one. Greyheim, though I'm sure if I were face to face with Bjorn, I would consider him one. Anyway, yeah, so in general, the wargs are spoken of in The Hobbit as if they are the allies of the goblins. In other words, they are treated both in the fact that their language is described. They're described as communicating and understand. They're not merely, irrational, hungry carnivores that have pursued their prey and treed them, and now are trying to figure out what to do with their treed prey. Right? They are rational creatures who are attempting to do problem solving, right, and are holding them up in the tree to wait for their allies, the orcs, to come, who will be able to deal with the trees in ways that the wargs know that they themselves are not capable of doing. Gandalf in The Hobbit overhears the wargs talking about this, right? So the wargs clearly have much higher, Hobbit wargs clearly have much higher intelligence than regular wolves. As sort of solidified by their own language, which they have, which Gandalf overhears, and but they are, I will say, although they are treated, I've been saying that they're treated as allies by they're treated as allies by the orcs, by the goblins. They're definitely treated as like second-class allies, right? They're not treated as equals by the goblins. It's pretty clear who's the junior partner in this partnership, right? When the goblins show up in The Hobbit, I mean. The mere fact that Gandalf, through his fire, burning pine cones, is kind of getting the best of it, and the wargs are all running around in confusion and everything, and then the goblins show up. And not only do the goblins show up and totally turn the tables there, but they laugh, right? The situation which has brought the wargs into, which has confounded the wargs and brought them into great fear and uncertainty, is considered comical by the goblins, right? The relationship to fire, Green Great Dragon, is exactly where we see their different approach to like, so there are fires now burning instead of being a problem. This is a fun opportunity, right? The way that the goblins are able to handle the situation, turn the weapon of their enemy into a tool against them. The wargs are clearly intelligent compared to other wolves, but their intelligence is clearly nothing like the intelligence, on a very different order from the intelligence of the goblins. And it's equally clear that it's the goblins who are, making the decisions here. Anyway, okay, so it's fair to recall those things, because those are the things that we're kind of importing from The Hobbit. But I would kind of tap the brakes on that just a little bit. Again, Aragorn's reference, the wargs have come west of the mountains. Again, like, we should remember them being east of the mountains from when we were in The Hobbit, right? So that's also kind of a reminder that this is not their normal territory. This situation is parallel to the one in The Hobbit, but it's not exactly the same. It's not the same place. It's not the same. And we shouldn't be expecting them to go into the same burned out, end up in the same burned out pine glade or something. They're on the other side of the mountains. So again, Aragorn is recalling that scene to us, but we can't just automatically import everything from The Hobbit. As I said, stone giants, right? If we look back over the Hobbit, sort of the parallels in the Hobbit story, Carothros is kind of in the parallel position to the stone giants that we got in The Hobbit, the rock-throwing stone giants. And that we would have been very wrong just to import from The Hobbit exactly what we saw there, right? So we do need to be cautious. We can't just do that. We can't just do that flippantly, right? Or it's not a thing we can merely assume. But in as much as the text does seem to be pushing us towards that parallel, it's okay to be remembering it and thinking about it. So now let's get to, first, remember our flashback. When Boromir heard voices howling in the wind in Carothros, he was very resistant to the idea that the sound was just the wind. Let those call it the wind who will, there are fell voices on the air. And Aragorn, you will remember, said that he does call it the wind, but that does not make what he says untrue. This sense of mystery there. Aragorn not denying that there are indeed fell voices in the air. Is it just the wind, or is it not just the wind? How is it both at once? And the idea that Aragorn suggests that on the one hand, yes, you are hearing the wind howling, but it is howling with a fell voice. There is a fell voice on the air that is speaking through the wind itself. That was one of those moments where we get this, in my mind, quite scary idea of Carothros, right? Of the giant Carothros, of the being Carothros that is kind of looming over them there in the mountains. Is it a physical thing? Is it a spiritual thing? I mean, is it a spiritual creature? Is it something that is this a voice that is merely being conveyed to us on the wind? Or is this a fell voice that is being shaped by the wind itself, right? These were the questions which Aragorn was overtly not resolving, right? He was, his rather cryptic words in response to Boromir really open up those disturbing but unresolved possibilities, right? Where does that put us here? They were just hearing the wind and hearing the howling of the wind, and the description of the howling of the wind It at first seems, they all assume that what they're hearing is that it's just the wind, right? How the wind howls, it is howling with wolf voices. Here Aragorn is saying it is not. He does not call this the wind, right? This is wolves instead. So we get a contrast to what was said before. But again, I can't, like, what connection does this have with Caradhras? They still are, by the toes of Caradhras, if not actually on his knees, right? So Caradhras, who was apparently, according to Aragorn, manipulating the wind in order to howl at them in a fell voice before, that has been, is that still operative? Is that what they assumed it was when they heard the howling before? Like, oh, it's just Caradhras, pay no mind. And Aragorn's like, no, actually, that's wolves, right? Hrothgar, that is a really, really interesting point. I love that. Hrothgar says, when they entered Eregion, only Legolas could hear the land speak. Now it's a really noisy place, right? Yeah, exactly. Legolas is like, only the rocks are speaking, and I can barely, I can't make out much of what they say. And now everyone's like, would the rocks shut up already? Man, you can't even talk over the stupid rocks in this place, right? Yeah, I never thought about it that way before. But that is funny. Now it's like, totally run of the mill, right? Oh, yeah, no, don't worry about the howling on the wind. It's just the rocks. They do that, Yeah. Good. What are the wargs, what drew or sent the wargs west of the mountains? Ambrosius was asking. Aragorn's exclamation indicates this is unexpected behavior. Yes, the wargs have come west of the mountains. He was not expecting that. Now, I saw people earlier on were reminding us very appropriately, we were prepared for this. We were told that the scouts found that there were wolves coming up the Anduin Valley, right? That, I think, is the immediate... So there are two things that I think we should associate with Aragorn's proclamation of the wargs coming west over the mountains. One is the Hobbit, but the second are those reports. The scouts found that there were packs of wolves that were roving about on the east side of the mountains in the Anduin Valley. If they have now come west of the mountains, that's different, right? So yes, that's and that's different, and that's bad news. That's bad news for them. Notice, by the way, what that also implies? It implies to me that the wargs didn't seem to have any trouble going over the Redhorn Pass in January. Presumably they're not coming over it right now through the huge snowdrift that was just thrown up there. But instead, they had come through before and were already over here, but are only now coming in. Yes, Bjorning, I do think that's exactly what we're supposed to think of. Bjorning says, I would like to note that Elrond sensed the shadow as reaching to the foot of the Misty Mountains. Presumably, Bjorning, the eastern foot of the Misty Mountains, right? Says, do the presence of wargs imply that the shadow reaches farther now? Yes. Yes, it absolutely does. That, I think, is what Aragorn is thinking when he makes that proclamation there. Yes, several people are suggesting they might have come up through the Gap of Rohan. It is possible. The reason I don't think that likely, I mean, it's conceivable, of course. We can't rule that out. We know that Saruman has wargs, and he's at the Gap of Rohan. But I don't think so for two reasons. One, I don't think he's deploying armies of wargs because he needs the wargs to fight his war in Rohan. that's where he's going to be using his wargs there. I think the Crabine are from Saruman. I don't think that the wargs are from Saruman. The other reason that I don't, is that again, we've been reminded about the wolves east of the mountains. Aragorn, I think, by saying they have come west of the mountains, wargs that, like, whose home base is essentially in the Gap of Rohan at Isengard, like them coming west of the mountains is like they could do that before breakfast, right? So that's not a big deal. Again, I think he's thinking of the wolves, the wolves that were spotted by the scouts that we heard about before. He seems to connect them with those. And this is news. It's news that they've come west. They weren't west of the mountains before. And exactly as Bjorning was recalling, Elrond's perception, his sort of spiritual perception, that the shadow of Sauron had come to the feet of the mountains, that seems to be outdated now. I do think that that's what we're supposed to see, that now the shadow is reaching at least over, perhaps through or under the mountains. The shadow has come to the western side of the mountains, and they are no longer safe. So that's why I suspect that the wargs in question here are not wargs that have been sent up by Saruman through the Gap of Rohan, but wargs that have been that have come over one pass or other, possibly the Redhorn Pass, possibly the pass up by the Gladden Fields. That these are the wargs that were spotted by the scouts over there. So have they been sent? Well, Gandalf thinks so. Need we wait until morning then? Says Gandalf snarkily. Right, remember Frodo has just said, let's sleep on it and wait until morning. Gandalf will get votes easier, in the sunlight, right? So Gandalf's like, sort of, I think, kind of half jokingly is like calling the vote here, right? So, shall we vote now? Right? With the wolves bearing down on us? What do y'all think? What do y'all think now? And then he says, as Gandalf is kind of wont to say, it is as I said, right? Gandalf is kind of a big I told you soer. He does that a lot. It is as I said, the hunt is up. Even if we live to see the dawn, who will now wish to journey south by night with the wild wolves on his trail, right? All of that is directed at Boromir, right? At least, need we wait until morning then is sort of directed at Frodo, or at least responding to what Frodo said. But Boromir was the only one who was suggesting journeying south, towards the Gap of Rohan, towards, Lasarnach and the south of Gondor, right? Towards Dol Amroth. And so he says, who will now wish to journey south? Now, notice that Gandalf, although he is snarkier than Boromir, Gandalf is both snarkier and shorter tempered than Boromir. He is also being somewhat diplomatic here, right? He says, I told you so, but he doesn't call out Boromir, right? He doesn't say, I told you so, Boromir, right? Nor does he say, like, so, Boromir, still want to go south? Huh? Still think that's a good plan? No. Even though he is saying, now, you will remember that just a couple minutes ago, I said that we can't possibly go south. And you'll remember when we talked about that, we were talking about how Gandalf clearly has a different sense of how imminent their danger is. He believes that stealth is done, that they are going to be pursued, and that there's no way that they could possibly remain safe and undiscovered on a long overland journey when they're being pursued. In Gandalf's mind, at this point, stealth is completely impossible. they have blown the stealth. The beacon that he lit on the top of, not the top of, but up on the slopes of Karathras has in Gandalf's mind completely put paid to the very potential for secrecy, right? That's why he says, it is as I said, the hunt is up. We've been hunted, we've been spotted. He knew they were spotted. He didn't know that they would be pounced upon quite as quickly as this. But he is saying that this is exactly what he had been fearing, and why he was saying, why he was now so very convinced of the thing of which he, says he had a notion from the very beginning, that they were going to have to go to Moria. This is also, I believe, Aragorn seems also to accept Gandalf's assertion that Moria is the only viable option now. Even though he does so with kind of a bad grace, still grumping about Moria to a pretty significant degree. Ilmaniel says, was it the fire that gave them away? Yes, the fire? His magic? That's what Gandalf implies? Sort of both, right? And yes, Jeffrey, you are absolutely right that Boromir was free to still break off now and head south if he wanted to. But even Boromir would have to admit that is now no longer an option, right? I mean, essentially, I feel like what Gandalf's statement here, what his I told you so boils down to here is, I told you so that Moria is the only path we can possibly take, right? Who would want to go there? Gimli accepted, right? No, it's not a good idea. No, it's not a safe path. No, it's not a sensible thing to do. But it is now clearly our only road, and therefore, clearly the road that we ought to take. Yeah. So, the hunt is up, Maureen, literally means, well, there are two. One is that, the hunt is, in full stride after them. The other way of understanding it is that, the hunt is over. The hunt is up. So, when you're hunting, right, there are a couple stages to the hunt, right? The first step when you're hunting something is to find it. Before you can chase it or kill it, you have to find it, right? Once you found it, then you have to, catch it. You have to track it and catch it and then kill it. You could say that the killing of it is arguably a third stage, right? They're the ones being hunted. Yes, he's talking about the hunting of them. And he's saying they were being hunted before. Right? The hunt was on previously, right? But now the hunt is up. This isn't a hunt anymore. Before they were being hunted, and that's why they were hiding, right? Because Gandalf knew that they were being hunted. Now they're being chased. That's different from being hunted, right? Now the dogs have their scent and are on their trail. So it's not a hunt anymore, it's a chase now. And that is, I think, what Gandalf is trying to tell them here. Which again is why he's saying it is as I said. That's what he was trying to tell them before when he was trying to explain to Boromir why, although it might seem sensible, the suggestion of going south all the way around the White Mountains is an insane plan that is, more impossible than knocking at the gates of the Dark Tower itself, right? Because they're being chased and there's no way that they can possibly escape. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, even if we live to see the dawn, he puts the waiting until dawn thing into a very new context, right? Boromir responds to Gandalf, "How far is Moria?" And this is interesting. That's a concession. Boromir's not going to argue with him. Boromir can see, yes, clearly, that is the only option, right? And he is immediately thinking practically, how far is Moria? Clearly, his question boils down to, could we get there? Could we get underground before the wargs get to us, right? Or is it far enough away that we really don't have a chance of that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's time to go to ground, Almaray. It's like they're the foxes, right? Yes. Bjorning, it is a stunning turnaround for Boromir. But again, in my normal role of Boromir apologist, I will say he has been practical all along, right? He's been practical all along. And I give him credit for not being stubborn here. I mean, we were seeing how last time, during the final stages of the pre-Wolf debate, he was still making suggestions that were, he wasn't trying to divide the party, right? He wasn't just stomping off in a huff or something like that, but he was definitely now making suggestions explicitly contrary to the direction that the leader was wanting to take them in, right? But yeah, he here, Sphinx exactly right. He wasn't wrong. There's no reason for him to think he was wrong. But the circumstances have now changed, and that's exactly what he's going to point out. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. When he talks about the orc that one fears, he's talking about Moria, right? He believes that Moria is full of orcs. The name of Moria is black, and I think that's why, right? He's heard stories about the orcs of Moria. There are lots of those, like with the Dwarf Wars, and that was a long time ago. And then the Battle of Five Armies, but that was a long time ago. Yeah. So yes, he thought, and remember that he was comparing it. He compared going into Moria to going and knocking at the gates of the Black Tower, the Dark Tower itself. And again, which also, by the way, the Dark Tower, kind of full of orcs, right? And worse things, but orcs at least. So he thought, again, if, we don't know what he expects, he being Sauron, right? We don't know what he expects. He may watch all roads, in which case going into Moria is as bad as walking to Mordor, right? That was what he was very rationally concerned about. And his reasons for not wanting to go into Moria make perfect sense, right? But now things are changed. Now they are definitely in trouble. They are definitely in trouble, and although he has good reason to fear orcs in Moria, the wolf that one hears is worse. But let's not pass over the sentence that he says before that, right? How far is Moria? Asked Boromir. So again, he's conceding, like, yep, no, you're right, we can't possibly go south. I get it. There is now clear and imminent danger, and we have to, we need to take shelter. And can we get there before the wolves get to us? Right. And notice he's also asking that in a way not intended to freak out any halflings who might be standing nearby, right? How far is Moria? Gandalf's grim answer is, there was a door southwest of Caradhras, some 15 miles as the crow flies, and maybe 20 as the wolf runs. Yeah. Notice, notice his comparisons, his very ominous comparisons, right? He's measuring it by the running of the wolves that are chasing them, and he's measuring it also by the flight of the crows that were hunting for them before. Neither of these are positive images, right? He's like, let me tell you how far away potential safety is. And by potential safety, I mean the death trap we were all just talking about a minute ago. Let me tell you how far away that is in units of measure defined by our enemies hunting and pursuing us, right? And Jackie, it absolutely does suggest that the crows and the wolves are related in Gandalf's mind. Yes, that both of them are hunting for them. There is no, I think there's, just as there is no reasonable doubt that the genocide of crows that flew over them in Eregion, it was clearly not a natural flock, right? This was not a spontaneous, this is not spontaneous avian behavior. They were searching out the land, as Aragorn somewhat tentatively says to Sam. That was clearly what was going on there. So yeah, there was something happening there. Gandalf is equally convinced that the wolves are being sent after them. They've been hunted by crows and by wolves, and now the wolves have found them. The howling suggests it. The howling suggests it. Of the wolves, I mean. Wolves don't just randomly howl, right? Tutuspan says, spontaneous avian behavior is the name of my new prog rock band. Okay, I can get behind that. Yeah. So, we can't be too rash in the conclusions that we draw. But Jackie, I do believe that the association that Gandalf makes between the crows and the wolves here suggests very clearly that Gandalf sees them. I don't necessarily think that this proves that he sees them I don't think it necessarily proves that it's not true that one was sent by Saruman and the other sent by Sauron, necessarily, right? I don't think it suggests they're on precisely the same team in exactly that way, just that they're both hunting them, right? They've now found two things. They've now faced three enemies, one of whom is thankfully immobile, though inconveniently placed, namely the mountain, Caradhras. But the other two are highly mobile and after them. Right now, we don't know that the crows are coming after them right now. Again, we don't necessarily, I don't think we can assume from this that Gandalf believes the two of them to be like immediately coordinated together, right? But they're both their enemies. To me, the effect of him using these units of measure, right? The number of miles that the wolf runs and the number of miles that the crow flies, it has an interesting effect. On the one hand, he's saying it's pretty close to here. I mean, like 20 miles, a 20-mile trek is not terribly bad news. They could get there reasonably quickly. but not at a sprint. It's not that close. And there's no way they're getting there before the wolves catch them. The wolves can run a lot faster, right? So on the one hand, he's saying that it's close, but at the same time, by using those units of measure, he is saying it is way too far away. There is no chance. There is no chance that we can get there before the wolves catch us. That's why Gandalf is so grim about it, right? Now, I don't want to skim over. Several people have pointed out the rather ominous statement, there was a door southwest of Carothros. Like, was is not necessarily particularly inspiring, right? There's a certain element of I'm making no promises to that verb tense that are slightly disquieting. But we'll see. Right? We'll see. Look at Boromir's response. Now back to Boromir's first sentence. Then let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can. Is Boromir in charge? Doesn't that kind of sound like the thing that the person in charge would say? Right? Now, I'm not saying this so as to imply that I believe that Boromir's here just absolutely hijacking the company. But this is a pretty firm suggestion, right? Yeah, I agree, Kurtzimus. He would be more, if these were his soldiers, he would be more imperative than this, right? We will stay here until morning or something like that. Yes, exactly. Suggesting with emphasis, Silk Westcott, I agree with that, right? The most important thing here is that Boromir is showing he's on the same team, right? He's not, I take this in general as a very positive thing. Let us, it's still we, right? He's saying, I'm with you, and we are in this together. Let us start tomorrow if we can. We must band together to face this. I agree with you now about the path. I thought you were wrong before. Other things being equal, I would probably still think that you're wrong. But under the current circumstances, with being pursued by wolves, clearly this is the best path that we can do. So I'm on board. I'm not fighting with you. It's going to be okay, is one thing, right? Again, you have my support. But at the same time, he is also, compare this. It is a suggestion, but I agree with Silk Westcott that it's a suggestion with emphasis. Contrast this line with his line about the firewood. No preamble, no like, if I could make a suggestion, because I have experience in the mountains and stuff, maybe we should consider doing this thing. Right? He's not talking that way anymore. Let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can. He's the one to suggest a course of action, right? When Gandalf gives him the data, here's how far away we are. Boromir immediately is the one to suggest the course of action. He is taking a stronger hand. He is now being a firmer voice in the leadership of the company, in the decision-making of the company, than he was before. Like, that seems to me pretty clear, right? And again, and nobody opposes him. Nobody, shoots him down for it. And again, I think one of the primary reasons for that is he is doing that while also saying, I'm with you, right? I'm not like, let's not fight. I'm not going to argue. We're working together here, right? Let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can. What is he saying? What does that suggestion boil down to? As a suggestion, it's still fairly vague, right? It's still fairly vague. What's he, Because remember, we just talked about this is the third reference to dawn tomorrow, right? The first was Gandalf's snarky comment, need we wait until morning then, right? Like Gandalf's snarky derailing of the whole voting question, right? But then he adds, even if we live to see the dawn. Gandalf has already asserted those wolves are obviously going to be with us before dawn, right? We're going to be beating off wolves before dawn. Clearly. Which is why Boromir asks how far it is. Could we, any chance we could get there in, I don't know, the next 45 minutes, right? Like that's kind of Boromir's question, right? 20 miles away? Okay, no. So, on the one hand, it seems almost like a contradiction. Gandalf says, hey, we don't need to wait until morning. We might not live to see the dawn. The hunt is up. We got to get going. And Boromir's response is, great. So let's wait. Let's camp here until dawn. But of course, you see what he's suggesting, right? There is a 0% chance that they are going to escape before the wolves catch them. So they'd be better off waiting and fighting off the wolves right here where they are. Right? The wolves are going to they're either going to run them down from behind as they vainly attempt to run towards the mountains in the dark, or the wargs could catch them prepared to fight them off. Right? And that's why when Boromir says, let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can, that's a very gentle way of saying, assuming we survive the wolf attack that is now pretty much guaranteed to happen this evening, then we'll start, we can probably get there over the course of the one day, while it's daylight tomorrow. If we leave at dawn, if we A, survive, and B, leave at dawn, then we'll probably get there before dark. So that's great. But first we're going to have to survive until the dawn. And Boromir, again, he's being very gentle in suggesting this. He's not being alarming. Everybody is not panicking here, right? Indeed, the fact that Boromir is looking ahead towards plans for tomorrow is itself intrinsically optimistic, right? Aragorn clearly picks up what he's putting down. That's why Aragorn loosens his sword in its sheath. It's going to get used soon, which is a big deal, by the way, right? Enduro has never been drawn in the face of an enemy before. So that's kind of a big deal. Yeah, Dan, you're absolutely right that Boromir knows that if they can pick their battleground, they stand a better chance of fighting off the wolves. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, then he says his thing. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. I believe that both Boromir and Aragorn are making these up. I don't think that that's a saying. I don't think that that's a standard thing. It rhymes, so it sounds like it, right? But I very much doubt that they have a saying in Gondor. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. On the one, here are the reasons why I don't believe that. Reason number one. Are there wolves? Like, do the wargs, who are allies with the goblins and associated with orcs, come down to Gondor much? Like, has that been a thing? I don't see much reason to believe that it would be, necessarily. Secondly, from a Gondorian military context, is that even a saying that makes sense? The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. Like, would they say that? Right? I mean, like, maybe it's conceivable, but I don't think so. I think that he's saying it possibly accidentally, possibly. It sounds spontaneous to me. Yeah, wolves were in the Vale of the Anduin. Yeah, like way north of Gondor. Like, do they come south of Rauros? Is that a thing? Does that happen a lot? Like, I mean, maybe it's conceivable, but the only wargs that we hear of are in the Anduin Valley. I mean, again, just mostly from The Hobbit, of course. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I think that this is a spontaneous utterance by Boromir. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. I think it's a spin. I don't think it's exactly accidental. I think he starts saying it, and then, the rhyme occurs to him, and he bangs it out. It is also possible, as who was it? One of y'all, Vardendil, was suggesting that this might be another Findegil King's Rider moment, right? When he's like, what would be cooler, right? What would be cooler is if Boromir and King Elessar, spoke in like opposing rhyming, couplets here. That would be cool, right? That would really elevate this moment to like the heroic pitch that would really capture it better, right? I think that that's possible, but I do think it's possible that Boromir would in fact have the wherewithal to make that up on the spot. And I definitely think that Aragorn, that would mean, by the way, if I'm right about this, that Aragorn is in a sense rap battling him. Yes, that he is deliberately responding to Boromir's rhyme by composing another rhyme on the spot. What they're saying is pretty clear, right? Concrete, actual danger that we know to be near us is worse danger that we are not 100% sure is there, right? And Aragorn says, yes, but where there are wolves, there are probably orcs, right? It never rains, but it pours, he's saying. Yeah, well, they're not exactly. I hesitate to go so far, Abelard's Junks, to say they're spitting bars, because they're spitting like a bar each, right? I mean, it's pretty low key as ciphers are concerned. But in any case, what is the effect of the rhyme? Why would you do this? Why would either Boromir and Aragorn or Findegil King's Rider think that a little rhyming couplet is appropriate here? What does it convey? What does it do? Right? What is the effect of the rhyme? Notice the effect that it had on all of you, right? The effect that it had on all of you is exactly, Eodric, that's exactly it. It's the form of an aphorism. It conveys wisdom. Yes, it sounds like they make it sound like a proverb, right? They are stating a thing which they believe to be not just relevant to their circumstances, but they are pointing to how the thing that they're saying is a piece of general wisdom, right? Like something you might hand down. It might become a proverb after this, right? It is not hard to imagine any or all of the hobbits using these as proverbs or aphorisms in their, later life, right? I mean, can you imagine, Sam saying the wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears, to his kids 20 years from now? I sure can, right? Where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. Can you see Mayor Sam bringing that up in a, in a town meeting? I can. Yes, and oh my goodness, you are completely right, JJ. That settles it for me. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, he said. And it became a proverb, though now we say out of the frying pan into the fire in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. In the parallel scene in The Hobbit, Bilbo does spontaneously utter an expression which is then taken as a proverb, we're told, later on, right? That it became a proverb. JJ, presumably because he himself kept saying it, right? He must have been, since he was the only one in the Shire who was there, if it caught on in the Shire, it caught on because of Bilbo, right? So it became a proverb, though, if he does say so himself. So we already have, again, in the parallel scene, the spontaneous utterance of someone that becomes a proverb. And these are better, right? We already did a spontaneous proverb in The Hobbit, but these sound even more proverbial, right? Yeah. Valora, yes. Is it possible that the aphoristic quality of the statements that were in the original Red Book struck the ear of Findegil, right? Like, oh, those things that they just said could become proverbs, but they'd be snappier with rhyme, right? So let me put rhyme in. Very possible. Very possible. Yeah. The rhyme that one hears is more memorable than a word that appears, says Beluxmont. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, Leaf of Starlight, I agree. My vote would be that this is what that these were actually spontaneous utterances. I think that they are both clever enough for that. And I don't know, haven't you ever done this before? Hasn't this ever happened to you? When you start saying something and like you hear, like you can hear, like you get halfway through a sentence and then you can see how you can end it to make it sound cooler, right? Like the beginning of Boromir's line, the wolf that one hears, he wants to say the wolf that one hears is worse. I mean, by using one, he's generalizing it, right? So, I mean, his intention is to make it aphoristic, right? Yeah, so he starts with the wolf that one hears is worse, and then like it's not a big leap, right? You can find your way from there. I don't think that he necessarily like stops and thinks up the rhyme, right? Like kind of puzzles it out and then utters the rhyme. Again, I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to say that. Yeah, but anyway, and if once it was done for Aragorn to imitate it, I know plenty of people who would be clever enough to pull that off, I think. Like I said, I mean, compared to a rap battle, this is grade school stuff, right? So yeah. And yes, Boromir is used to public speaking, and Aragorn is clever and well read. So yeah. I do not at all have a hard time believing that these are spontaneous utterances by them. But I'm also, I don't object to the idea of Findigil dressing this up a little bit. Dan says we have no reason to think that these bars actually rhymed in the original Westron. No, actually, I think we do, Dan. I think we do. Because I think that my explanation there, Dan, would be that this is why if we go back to the Hobbit line, right? Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves, that doesn't sound really catchy. Like a really catchy proverb. It was catchier in the Westron, right? There was probably, some like alliteration or wordplay or something that's lost in translation there, right? But here, the translator, our modern translator, right, Tolkien, I could see that the proverbs rhymed in Westron, so he's like, well, I'm gonna replicate the rhyme in order to convey, the aphoristic quality of these statements. Yeah. Totally. Exactly. Leaf of Starlight was just saying the same thing. Exactly. Yep. Okay. Notice, by the way, Aragorn, once again, being a bit of a downer, right? Boromir's proverb is perfectly appropriate. Nothing wrong with that, right? Good salutary moral for the moment. It agrees with Gandalf's conclusion. This is his explanation for why he's going along, right? Notice also there, maybe just a hint of, Gandalf, I am not saying that I believe your assessment of this whole situation, is correct from beginning to end, but it is only common sense to do the thing that you're suggesting now that we do, right? But Aragorn's response: where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. Bit of a downer. Again, Aragorn kind of does this, doesn't he? The present danger, the danger that the lesser danger that is present, is worse than the greater danger that you're less than 100% sure of, right? Okay, sure, that's great. But Aragorn says, however, where that lesser danger is, the greater danger is probably right on its heels. Thanks, Aragorn. That's great. Appreciate that, right? He's had a run of these for several pages, ever since Carothras. Aragorn has been in this gloomy rut. He does take after Bard. Yeah, he does take after Bard. Now, again, you could say it is merely... Now, like, the combination of that with loosening his sword in its sheath is slightly encouraging, right? I mean, his attitude is clearly not one of despair or even of despondency, but of warning, right? Like, yes, but don't think that we've escaped the larger danger, because we probably haven't. If the wargs are here, the orcs are probably close. Just ask, the nephew of Bilbo over there what he read in the Red Book, right? Yeah, but he is. So he's expecting the worst, though he's expecting the worst with a kind of grim confidence, loosing his sword in its sheath, right? And yes, Vardendil, I absolutely agree. Grimness is associated with kings a lot in Tolkien. From Bard through Aragorn, right? Kings are often grim. That happens, right? It is a soldier's resignation to battle, in a sense, Bjarnasonar. But yeah, he and I think he's also, it's a response to Boromir too, right? Boromir is clearly resolved for battle, and Aragorn is saying, we're probably going to end up fighting goblins too, as indeed they will. Yeah. How does Aragorn's grimness fit in with his association with Estel? It's a great question. One thing that I would point out, Aragorn is associated with Estel by other people and for other people, right? His mother gave Estel to the Dunedain, but she didn't say anything about him having Estel, right? I'm not saying Aragorn doesn't have it, but I think we need to be careful not to assume that the fact that Aragorn was called Estel as a child means that he himself is always and without fail a paragon of Estel. The Estel in question, when he was a kid, was the Estel that the other Dunedain can have, right? So I want to be a little bit careful about that. Also, I can't help but point out, we have no idea that Aragorn is associated with Estel. And I don't think Tolkien did either. When do we learn that? When do we learn that Aragorn was named Estel? Appendix A, right? Tolkien didn't write it, and I don't think he even thought it before now. I mean, that Appendix A stuff is clearly late. There's some material in the appendices that is just as clearly early material that he took out from the text and shoved into the appendix, as he was threatening to do with some of Faramir's talk, and as he tragically did not do in regards to things like the Hobbit custom of chucking their dirty dishes out of window. However, he but the stuff about Hobbit architecture did, in fact, get into the appendix and the prologue. But in any case, the Estel stuff is in the context of the story of Aragorn and Arwen, and that's very late. So Aragorn gets retroactively associated with Estel by Tolkien. That doesn't mean it's not appropriate to think about him, but I would not take it as a guiding principle as we read through the story here. So I think we have to be a little bit cautious about that. And I certainly agree with the things that several people are saying, with the things that several people are saying, that Estel doesn't necessarily mean sunny cheerfulness. Yeah. I mean, remember that arguably the greatest statement of Estel was uttered by the guy who was being dragged off to Morgoth's prison with his entire troop and family dead around him, right? Well, not all of his family. So Estel is not certainly associated at all points with cheerfulness. And yes, Aure and Tulava is, of course, exactly what I am thinking of. Húrin in the fens of Serech. Anyway, yeah. So let's don't force Estel or certainly it would be inappropriate to come to the text, to come to things that Aragorn does, even things that Aragorn says, and be looking for Estel in it, right? That's not the case. He is not an allegorical figure or something. And I know none of you or all of you are, have been well taught by Tolkien and are not going to make this into a personification allegory. But notice that's the kind of thinking that name invites it, right? Names are the great, it's one of the allegory triggers, right? When you find a character with what seems like an obviously allegorical name, right? I mean, if you're in a story and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hi, my name is Faith," right? You might know where you are, right? You might have a thing or two you might expect of that person, right? Exactly, Josh. This is not Pilgrim's Progress. Love that line in Pilgrim's Progress. My name is Honest, and I hope I am, right? One of the delightful things about Pilgrim's Progress as an allegory is that the characters in Pilgrim's Progress know they're in an allegory, right? And that's always a lot of fun. I love I love allegory. I'm not ashamed. I do not cordially dislike allegory. I love it. But again, it is not only because Tolkien disagrees with allegory, which again, I think is not even true. Tolkien wasn't good at allegory. He did try to write it and it didn't go well. But in any case, I think that we have to, the reason to be careful of it is simply, I don't think it works. I don't think it's appropriate. And it can kind of sneak in, right? Anyway, I know you guys aren't suggesting allegory. I don't want to make it sound like I'm accusing anybody of that. That's obviously a simplification. But again, because we all, to some extent, have some basic concept of personification allegory, right? Of how that kind of story works. And so when you latch onto the idea, Aragorn is named Estel, like he is Estel. There are moments, and this has come up in our conversations before when we've talked about this. There are ways in which all you have to do is say his name in the context of making an observation of the thing, and it starts to take on quasi-allegorical overtones. It's almost inevitable. It's very hard to resist that kind of thinking with these particular names. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm just that kind of thinking, that says because he's named Estel, he must represent it, demonstrate it, show it, be connected with it. Like it's, whether one is thinking of it explicitly or not, that kind of thinking creeps in, almost inevitably. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I was thinking there might be just time to peek at the next slide, at the second slide. But there's not. But then I started talking about allegory and it was all over. Yeah. Oh man, Silk Waistcoat. Now I totally want a story with a character named Al Agori. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Ardencran, how far can a wolf's howl carry on the wind? Miles, but not that far. Yeah, miles, but not much further than that. They're almost certainly fewer than 20 miles away already. Yeah. Okay. Let's do our field trip. It's field trip time. Thanks, everybody. Those of you who can only stay for book discussion, thanks for joining us. And in our field trip today, we're heading back to Tharbad, where we keep losing our horses, and I can't figure out why. But here we are. Thanks, everybody. Valori, good evening tonight.
Good evening.
Glad you could make it this week.
Yeah, me too. Hope my streak of bad luck is on its way out for now.
Yeah. Good.
So just a note on Aragorn's being a negative Nelly through most of this. We have seen him be cheerful. He was sort of the chief morale officer when it was taking the hobbits to Rivendell.
Yes.
That was a different case. He wasn't very good at some of the jokes, but he did his level.
Right. Yeah. I agree. It's almost, the vague impression that I get is that we can see, because you know how we've been noticing how Gandalf is being so conscious of the morale of the hobbits that at times he's almost overdoing it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's Gandalf. He overdoes everything.
Right. It's almost as if Aragorn is deliberately counterbalancing that. It's like now that Gandalf is here to, kind
Sam.
of. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's being more like Sam. Yeah, he's giving voice to the other side of things.
He's going, you be positive, I'll be realistic.
Yeah, well, he will, and I don't know. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure exactly how to take it, but I agree there's, that difference is striking. And again, the difference seems to me to be Gandalf and Gandalf's presence,
Yeah.
So
you can see that mounting frustration in Boromir as he's trying to get them to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's just, he's gotten to the point where it's like, Mommy, Daddy, stop fighting. Let's all go to bed.
Yeah. Okay.
Like
so
he almost feels like it's like, since Legolas and Gimli aren't speaking up, he's sort of got like the oldest kid problem where he has to sort of, he knows he's not in charge, but he's old enough to speak his mind at this point.
Yes. So by the way, I came up with a theory about this building last time.
Okay.
So this took a while, but here are the results of our inquiries from last time. So we went through and we went all the way through to the far gate, and we found there an interesting thing. And that is the larger, fancier paving stones of the Greenway coming up, like the big paving stones that we see down in Enedwythe and Dunland, right?
Yeah.
Those are there on the other side of the city, and they end right at the gate, the south gate of Tharbad, which clearly shows that's the end of Gondorian jurisdiction, and Tharbad is the beginning of Arnorian jurisdiction, right?
Yep,
I mean, I think that seems clearly to be the indicator there. So my I started last time with the puzzling question: what is this building that is so close to the city? On the one hand, it could be some kind of rich person's residence, like that's certainly possible. But I mean, it's awful close to the city for that. I mean, if you're going to come out here and build a separate building, maybe, not right under the walls. Like it just seems like a weird place to build a house simply. So I was thinking there's got to be some kind of function to it, but it would also be a strange place to build a rest area. We were talking, so the one theory that it could be like a, Arnor welcomes you center. But again, even there, you'd think they'd do that in the city. I mean, you don't come through the city from Gondor and then get welcomed on the far side of the city. Like that's just weird. So my theory was that it's a customs house. It's a tax collector's booth.
Yep.
Which they were civil enough not to put and that makes Tharbad like the duty-free zone, right? So Tharbad is the duty-free zone when you're coming from Gondorian territory to Arnorian territory. But if you're coming all the way through and you're bringing goods north from Gondor or something like that, then you got to stop and pay the toll here. And if you're bringing things down to Gondor from Arnor, you got to pay the Gondorian toll there too. So that was my theory about what this is. Customs house.
Sure.
All right, so let's go back inside and try to get. We've been into Tharbad twice now, but both times. Oh, we did find, by the way, some Cardolan tower decorations in there. So it's clear that Cardolan did, in fact. I think that they. It seems obvious that they just kind of retooled it because they took it over and built it up, because again the ending of the old Gondorian road at the gate shows that it wasn't built later on. It was built back in the days when Arnor and Gondor were still early on a thing. So anyway, so let's try maybe we'll get up on the bridge. The bridge is a fairly high spot. We just won't jump off the cliff this time. So let's come up on the bridge, which has lots of orcs on it, interestingly. All right. So, big picture aside, what is happening here? We've got a tall tower over there on the eastern side. That makes sense. Western side, sorry. That makes sense because there we have... Oh, it doesn't make sense?
What?
All these rapids. This is supposed to be navigable well past Tharbad, this river.
Well, maybe it was when they first built it.
Yeah, and some of these rocks, especially these ruins right here, look like they could very likely be made from tumble-down ruins. Yeah, it's the rubble causing the rapids. Yeah. It does look like it. The one to the a little further down the west looks less like it, but I think it's
most of the rapids are centering around bits of architecture that's fallen in.
Yeah, I think that's clearly true with the one that's right in front of us to the southwest here. It's the one further down because I don't see other buildings around there. But in any case,
that one looks like a rock slide though, because you see the red rocks are the same as the rocks on the side.
Right. Okay, so that's still probably something that has happened since the Númenóreans sailed up this river.
And that's a lot of since.
Yeah, it's like 5,000 years ago, so sure.
Yeah.
A lot can happen geologically in 5,000 years. But I mean, even on the geological time frame, things can happen.
The Noldor and whoever go around here are always just like, oh, wow, I remember when this was navigable.
Right, exactly, yeah. They're like, man, things change so fast.
Is it in a couple of thousand years and then this?
Right. Yes, Hrothgar, I can certainly see how this river would have been deeper before the city fell into it. Yes. Okay, so, but anyway, as I said, the tower to the west, straight to the west there, would have been a downstream-oriented river, right? Whether it's like a light tower, like a lighthouse, in fact, or we've got this other tower on the other bank over there, right? So at least this one, this westernmost tower on the northern bank of the river seems designed for sea travel, so for ships coming in from the sea. What else do we see? We've got a bunch of lower buildings.
Rotunda-looking things.
Huh? What was that?
We got these rotunda kind of guys.
Yeah, we do have these little rotunda things.
Did they
let's see if we can get among those.
Feeling like this in Innuminas?
There were a bunch of rotundas in Innuminas.
Okay.
It was certainly a rotund city. Okay, there's this big tower in the north.
Mm-hmm. I think the spires in Innuminas threw me off.
Yeah.
There's no spires here. Not anymore.
So this part, if we look to the east on the south bank here.
That's a big old citadel there.
That's a big old citadel there. Yeah, that was clearly the center of the city in the old days. And it's on the south bank. Sort of bank. Hang on, that's not even a bank. That's an island. Isn't it an island?
Yeah. Again, that might not have been an island at the time.
It is true, though that would be very Annuminous, wouldn't it? I mean, Annuminous had that whole deal with the main palace being on an island in the middle.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, it looks like the area that's under this bridge might have been a little above water, especially given the rapids now.
Yeah, I mean, clearly from a navigation standpoint, this is, I mean, this river needs a dredging in the worst way, right?
Yeah.
It's way out of, and again, it's certainly not been assisted that a whole bunch of the city has fallen into it.
Well, possibly there were some locks or something like that would have made it easy for boat travel and transfer, and it also would have kept this area dry.
Yeah. The presence of a sort of a shallower part of the river here would certainly have been what suggested situating a city here in the first place, as a convenient place to cross this river, to go north and south. But of course, they would want to maintain the navigability of it, which is presumably why this bridge is so high.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we had to climb way up to get up to this bridge, which, again, considering that it would probably have been at a shallower point in the river to begin with to suggest the crossing, could have gone lower across, but it was leaving room for boats underneath.
Yeah. So we thinking all sails? Is that why? Because if it is shallower, then I'm not sure how tall a boat you could get through here.
Yeah, well, we'll look under it later on, but also, of course, we don't know. Is it possible there could have been a drawbridge here?
Yeah, possibly a drawbridge, but also all these little broken off columns here make me wonder if there were more structures. It does remind me very much of a canal lock.
Yeah, maybe. All the columns down there.
Some kind of man-made way to get boats around. But also, looking at the city on the other side of the bank, that it's pretty much flooded over there, where it probably wouldn't have been back in the day.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe they sort of harnessed and mastered the water to do what they wanted.
Yeah. No, I think they could. I mean, the Numenorians plainly had that kind of technology.
Yeah.
And so that means
modeled off of Romans, so aqueducts and locks and canals wouldn't be that big a stretch.
I think the arches under this bridge are sufficiently high for reasonably sized ships to come up here. Yeah. I see that, Emmanuel, that's what I was thinking too. I was thinking that these stone piers looked like it was probably just like huge wharves, like they're like I'm imagining I was imagining down there like a big old like riverside marketplace, basically, like right on the wharf where boats could dock next to it, and it would be like this big
the riverside district.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, we'll look in more detail. Right now, I'm just trying to get the general lie of the land. So we've got this central island, which may or may not have been an island. It's possible it was part of the South Bank or the North Bank. But I think probably island. We can see places where it was flooded. But if we look in more detail, look at the flight of steps that comes down to the water here on the western side of that central island, right? I think that was an island from the beginning. I don't think it's just flooded. Besides, as I said, it's very Annuminous.
There's almost lost my horse. There's on one of the little spits of land next to the island, there's a definite footpath running across it.
Wait, on which bank?
The little spit of land just in front of the central island. You see a bunch of reeds, and then there's a little brown path.
Yeah, maybe.
It's obviously more recent, but...
Right. Well, and that certainly suggests some recent flooding and stuff.
True. It does make me wonder if we're going to see cobblestones down there, or if it's just regular river rocks washed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, right down where that person is now running? Yeah.
Yep.
And hopping? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who's down there? It's Saginaw. Okay, right, yeah.
Saginaw. Thank you, Saginaw.
Exactly. Yeah. What's to report? Flagstones? Do you see flagstones there? Was that a street? Okay, then we get... Well, we still get a bunch of rotunda-like things up here. Looks more pebbly than flagstony? Okay.
Okay, so that's put in later, I guess.
All right. It looks... So, I was going to say then... At first, I was going to say the city seemed to favor the southern bank, but that's when I thought that this fortress here was on the southern side. But now that I see that it's in the middle, I think it's probably more evenly distributed and yet not symmetrical.
Yeah.
It's not, not that I would expect rigid and exact symmetry, but... Yeah. But it doesn't have that kind of... if we did have a zoom-in overhead map of this city, which I really wish we did, it would... I don't think that we would see... even the kind of symmetry of layout that we see in places like Minas Tirith, right? With the regular tiers that go around, on those regular gradations, or like the kind of symmetry we see in Isengard, right? With the way that the roads regularly radiate out and cross, right? You can see there was a very clear and kind of geometric pattern that was established there, and that, of course, was a Númenórean construction as well. So we know that between Minas Tirith and Isengard, we have those two very clear examples of extremist urban planning, like extreme artistic urban planning. So this does not seem to reflect anything of that sort. Of course, neither did Innuminus, right? Or Fornost. Yeah. So it's not that that's surprising at all. But although they're even, although they're equal, but they're not symmetrical and even. I don't think... It doesn't
imply they started at one place and then just branched out organically as the need arose.
Yeah, I think so. Though, I'm not sure about totally organic. I think it seems to me too even for that. I do think that this was a city that was conceived to be what it is. A city on both sides of the river, at this important crossing point. I mean, the importance of Tharbad. Tharbad is an enormously significant geographical location and political location in the older days, right? I mean, it is the crossing of a major river, which is hard to cross anywhere else. That makes it the absolute bottleneck for north-south traffic in this whole part of the continent, right? And at the same time, it's also the first major seaport upriver in the biggest, most navigable river in this whole part of the continent as well, right? So it is in that way, between the land route and the water route, a crossroads, which seems to me to be deliberately planned to be a crossroads.
Oh, it's like Bristol. It's like Bristol. That's part of it's in Virginia, and the other part's in Tennessee, and it runs on a railroad.
Right. Okay. Not familiar with Bristol there, but yeah, no. I mean,
literally, the town is bisected. It's borders two states. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, that
voting is so confusing.
That seems to be the intention. That seems to be the intention of the design of this city. Hence, its central feature being on the island in the middle, right? Neither one side of the river nor the other, but equally overseeing both sides, right?
Yeah, yeah. The DC conundrum.
Yeah, this fortress being at the heart of the whole city, the heart of the whole crossroads, right?
Yeah.
Commanding the river in both directions and the road in both directions.
And yet neutral.
Well, maybe.
No, it's still Arnorian. No.
Right, but at least again, and I've got to think, because of its nature as a crossroads and its comparative, I want to say comparative neutrality politically, right? I mean, it's not quite equidistant between Gondor and Arnor, but it's the closest there is between, to equidistant as far as major cities are concerned, because there aren't really any major cities in Enidwaith. This is, and as we have evidence, as we saw last time, that this was the boundary, that the boundary between Gondorian jurisdiction and Arnorian jurisdiction was here. For these reasons, I think that I want to say that it seems to me to make most sense that Tharbad, one of Tharbad's chief importance, like its chief importance is not political because it's not a central outpost of either place. It's the place in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And it's the place in the middle between
that's
two
where you sign
peaceful
treaties. That's where.
Yeah. Well, yes, if you had warring countries, right? If it would be of crucial importance if Arnor and Gondor were at war with each other, right? Who controlled Tharbad would be hugely important. But they were peaceful.
That never crossed anyone's mind.
Right, exactly, sure. Hence fortress, presumably, in the middle of it, right? And yet, again, so I think its primary significance, especially during the long centuries of peace at the beginning, was commercial. That this is a center place of trade, especially with being the way that the land route and the river route cross.
Yeah, that's definitely apparent, and you would have had all these different cultures sort of equidistant for meetings of the minds and trade and stuff. So that makes perfect sense as well.
Yeah, hence the all the piers on both sides, perhaps if they were wharves, broad wharves, you would have lots of sea, these big markets that where ships could sell their wares, like right from the docks, essentially. I was going to say domes are not fully, they're pointy domes, right? The pointy domes and all these rotundas that we're seeing around here, they kind of remind me of Numinous, though I don't remember pointy domes like this in Numinous.
Yeah, everything had big spiky bits in Numinous, so I'm not
right,
really,
and I don't see any of the spiky bits. Now, most of the towers don't have tops. They might have had spiky bits once upon a time, but it's hard to tell. But yeah, it is certainly Arnorian architecture, and obviously is very like the kind of Arnorian architecture we've been seeing around Cardolan here. But yeah, that's interesting. Amathorn is wondering if they harken back more to Numenor. It's possible, Amathorn. Of all of the places that we've seen, all the cities that we've seen, Tharbad is the one that is most likely to have been a city actually constructed as a city by Númenóreans in the Second Age.
Huh. Yeah.
Because the Númenóreans totally came up this river a lot. Like this was a big deal for them. And so I could absolutely believe, now, very likely maybe it wasn't as sort of big as this, as grandiose as this, but I think it's very possible here that what we're seeing is a city which was taken over by Cardolan and kind of redecorated by Cardolan when they seceded from Arnor. And therefore, so we've got a Cardolan city, which is a repurposed Arnorian city, which was originally a repurposed Númenorian city. Yeah.
That sounds like a central hub to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Vinulonde is, I believe, the port at the mouth of the river, the Númenorian port, right?
Yeah.
Going out here. Yeah, I think that Vinulonde was down here that's the mouth of the Brandywine. We're down at the Guathlo. Further. Yes, down at the mouth of the I still wasn't zoomed out far enough. I was looking at the wrong map. I think that's where Vinulonde was. So we know they had a major port at but that's they built it at the mouth of the river, of course, because that was the port to and from Númenor at that point. But we know they came up this river. This is the land that they deforested. That's why the trees are all young growth around here. You know, young growth from only the last 5,000 years. Really young trees here. But anyway, yes. So it is an interesting theory that perhaps the pointy domes that we're seeing are an architectural relic of not nouveau Númenorian architecture like Numinous, but old school, actual, old-time Númenorian, original new here. That's a really interesting theory. It's an interesting theory, and I am interested to explore it. It's getting late now, but here's what we'll do. Next time, we'll take one more. So this, we didn't really do a tour. We just stood on the bridge and looked around, which was good.
Well, this has sort of the understated charm to it, but also it follows the lost technology theory that Tolkien always says, that as they get older, the knowledge gets lost, and domes were one of the big things that got lost in the Dark Ages. Yep.
No, that's interesting. So next time we'll do a quick run around the city, looking around in the buildings and stuff, and let's see if we can see anything that looks like evidence of different archaeological levels, right?
Excellent.
I mean, we know we've seen that in different places in Lotro before, like in Bree, where you can see the three very clearly different levels, right? You can see the modern town of Bree, the old Arnorian ruins, and the older pre-Númenorian wall before that. So we know that there are places where they have in fact embedded that kind of history within the gaming architecture. We'll see if we can see anything that might suggest support for our Númenorian theory here next time. So we'll tool around the city itself and get a closer look next time, and then we'll see what comes next. Cool.
I can't wait.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. We will see you guys next week for a more detailed trip around the streets of Tharbad. In the meantime, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye now.